Hello and welcome into episode 23 of Preps to Pros. I'm Cooper Petagna alongside Andrew Ivins, and we are just wrapping up week 5 of college football, if you can believe it. We got a packed show for you today. A lot of juice from Andrew Ivins on this Monday. We'll also get to week 5 takeaways. A lot happening there and a lot to unpack as well. Wisconsin, Colorado, both of those jobs now open as Paul Chryst out in Madison and Karl Dorrell out as well. We will get into our first call segment, which we love, and then we'll finish up with a 2-minute drill. But there is so much going on. Drew, it never ends. Here we are, week 5, and the coaching cycle already heating up. What do you think, my man?
We predicted this to be the norm, right? Everyone wants to fire the guy and get the next guy in as soon as they can so you can get into that early signing period with a plan in place and recruit your roster. So I'm not surprised. But, I mean, if you did take a step back and look at this, I mean, what is that, 4 Power 5 openings, and we're at October 2nd or 3rd? I mean, that's just wild.
So a lot to talk about. Wisconsin, Colorado, like I mentioned, we'll get to that a little bit later in the show, but we are going to start you off with some Andrew Ivins recruiting juice. And Andrew, I want to start with top 247 receiver Jalen Brown. We mentioned a couple weeks ago that he would be taking some visits. The LSU commit, part of that number 7 ranked recruiting class. What's the latest with him?
Yeah, Jalen was a kid that was at Texas A&M a few weeks ago on an official visit when Miami was in town. So we saw that electric atmosphere at Kyle Field, a sold-out crowd. Sounds like he really enjoyed and liked that visit. I just don't know if the Aggies are going to have enough power to overtake the Tigers in this recruitment. Jalen told me a few days ago that this upcoming weekend he's going to be back in Baton Rouge for an unofficial visit. He's really looking forward to it because it's a noon kickoff, and that's going to allow him the opportunity and a chance to hang out with not only some coaches but some players. So I think LSU remains in a good spot here. Obviously, he's committed to them, but I'll add this. Miami, Florida State, Auburn, Michigan, they're all trying to get Jalen Brown back on campus. He's got a few official visits to use. I think you need to keep an eye on those 2 in-state schools, FSU and Miami. Jalen told me he really has been impressed with what the Seminoles have done this season. Obviously, they lost over the weekend to Wake Forest, but they started off 4-0. The offense is kind of humming. And then at Miami, he realizes the Hurricanes have a need at wide receiver. Josh Gaddis, the receivers coach, he has been working Jalen Brown a lot, so has Mario Cristobal. So still some twists and turns left in that recruitment. LSU seems to be in a good spot for now, but we'll see as we get closer to December and that early signing period.
11 a.m. kick this weekend in Baton Rouge. You better believe that the purple and gold faithful are going to be out and about early for that game. So LSU, Tennessee, top 25 matchup. We'll keep an eye on Jalen Brown. But, Drew, let's get to another guy in the state of Florida. That is Reuben Bain, arguably one of the best and most disruptive pass rushers in the country. He's coming off an unofficial visit to Auburn. What is the latest with him?
Reuben Bain, I saw him play on Friday night at Carousel Stadium. This is a kid who had 29.5 sacks as a junior, and I went to his game and came away thinking he was even better than he was last season. And he's just really a technically sound player with his hands. He can get after the quarterback, kind of got tweener measurables, but he's the real deal. When we talk about his recruitment, Cooper, you pointed out he was at Auburn this past weekend. I would keep an eye on where he goes this weekend. He told me there's a chance he might make it back to Tuscaloosa for Alabama's showdown with the Texas A&M Aggies. And if he doesn't return then check out the Iron Bowl in November. I think he could return to Alabama for another visit. Now, when we talk leaders, Rueben hasn't really trimmed it down. The crystal ball favors the Miami Hurricanes, and that's because his brother is on staff there in Coral Gables. He's a graduate assistant for Mario Cristobal. I talked with Ruben's parents over the weekend. They say Mario Cristobal texts them every day at 6 a.m. So the Hurricanes are trying really hard. I had someone in that camp tell me they think Miami leads. But everything I've said about Alabama over the past few weeks seems to be true. That's the one school I would keep an eye on here. Reuben Bain's dad told me, hey, man, Nick Saban, you see him on TV, then all of a sudden he's recruiting your son. That's certainly appealing. So I don't have a crystal ball pick in. I would just watch Alabama, but Miami's also in there as well. And then I think Auburn legitimately is a dark horse for Reuben Bain, assuming Brian Harsin and that staff stay in place.
If you're a fan of this show, Andrew Ivins has been echoing the Alabama message throughout Reuben Bain's recruitment. So we'll keep an eye on that. But Drew, now let's turn our attention to two teammates at American Heritage who are going to be playing their football together at the next level on Saturdays in Columbus at Ohio State. But that is Brandon Inniss and Mark Fletcher. I know Miami's sniffing around. What's the latest in the pursuit of Miami and the two top 247 standouts?
Yeah, Hurricane Ian pushed their Friday night game to Saturday. So American Heritage played at Cardinal Gibbons, big rivalry game. Had a chance to talk with both Brandon and Mark Fletcher after the game. They both had Ohio State stickers on their helmets, little sticker decals. But the big news is that Miami had a pair of coaches on the sidelines trying to, show some love on their bye week. Miami was off this weekend. I talked to Brandon. I talked to Mark Fletcher after the game. They basically told me the only school they're really communicating with outside of Ohio State is Miami, but it doesn't sound like there's any plans to take any visits. Sure, could a secret visit happen? Yeah, I mean, that's possible. But right now, these two guys sound all Ohio State. Both of them said they're going to return to Columbus for that game against, I think the way they call it, the team up north. That's what they said, not Michigan. They didn't want to use the word Michigan. So, Miami chipping away. But right now, it sounds like Ohio State for those two. And I'll add this. I mean, if I'm Miami, Brandon Inniss is a guy I would do whatever I could to get into my class. He's just an absolute football player. In that game on Saturday, he had 9 catches for almost 100 yards, played a little safety, picked off a pass, also doubled as a blocking tight end. I mean, this is just a football player and a guy who hates to lose. And that's kind of the X factor with Brandon Inniss. And I think Miami, that's what they need in their locker room right now.
Miami chipping away on a handful of top 247 prospects from the Sunshine State. Drew, you have to feel pretty confident. I think we've seen this before. We thought Miami was kind of down and out, especially in the quarterback race. They end up with one of the better arms in the country this cycle in top 247 quarterback, Jaden Rashada. So whether that's Jalen Brown, Brandon Inniss, or even a guy like Micah Mays, you have to think Miami is going to pull one of these guys at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And look, they were scheduled to bring in Malachi Coleman over the weekend, the top 247 wide receiver out of Nebraska. He was set to take an official visit this weekend. Sounds like that's not going to happen anymore. Gabby Arrudia of Inside the U, he reported that visit's off. But Miami is doing their homework. And, Cooper, you work for Mario. You know that he's not going to not upgrade that position. So we just don't know where it's going to come from, but they're going to find someone.
It will get done at some point. So Miami fans, be patient on that set of things when it comes to the receiver position. But Drew, week 5 takeaways, and I want to jump right into a game that me and you were texting during. We kind of had this one circled, but that was Florida State. And a lot had been made around Florida State coming into the game in a top 25 matchup against Wake Forest. Wake Forest ranked number 22 coming into this game, coming off a double overtime thriller against Clemson. Florida State coming off their most complete game of the season against Boston College, winning that game 44-14. Wake Forest wins this one by 10 points in Tallahassee, and we came away probably more impressed with the Demon Deacons and what Dave Clawson has been building there with that Wake Forest program for quite some time. But Drew, what were your just initial impressions and takeaways? Because I know you were very impressed with Wake Forest.
Well, I know what you texted me, and we had the same kind of thought. I mean, it seems like at Wake Forest, it's scheme over talent. That is not the most talented roster out of there, but they find ways to get the most out of their players. And you look at that offense with the slow mesh everyone's talking about. I think it just starts up front with that offensive line. They have 5 linemen. None of them are ranked higher than 3-star prospects. You got 3 sixth-year seniors up front. I mean, these are guys that other Power 5 schools didn't want. They've gone to Wake Forest. They've been there in Winston-Salem. They've been developed. And now your Wake is reaping the benefits. I mean, these are your homegrown prospects. There's no transfers there. These are your guys up front, and they're veterans. So I was impressed with that, and just really that offense in general. I mean, 11 of the past 19 games for Wake Forest, they've scored 5 touchdowns or more. I mean, that's a super impressive stat. I think anyone in the ACC would take that number if you're going to score 5 touchdowns a game, basically every time you're out. Coop, what about you? What stood out to you with that Wake Forest offense?
A lot of experience on that team, and I think coming off a double overtime loss to Clemson, there's a lot of teams that would be demoralized the week after and then have to go into a hostile environment. Nonetheless, against an undefeated Florida State team with a lot of momentum. But I mean, you talked about Sam Hartman, Ellison in the backfield along with Christian Turner, the Michigan transfer, and then A.T. Perry, Drew, I want to talk about a little bit, but 8 receptions, just under 100 yards. He was a factor throughout this game. Wake Forest's ability to be able to finish drives and long, sustainable drives. Also, their ability to convert on third down. You look at Wake Forest in the way that they capitalized there. But I think there were 10 of 18 on third down throughout that game. So obviously that clip, and listen, time and time after again and again, Sam Hartman was making big throws. That was kind of the thing that I came away with when they needed a big play. Sam Hartman was a guy delivering that, and they look like a real threat in the ACC, Drew.
Yeah, in Wake Forest, is Dave Clawson kind of like a quarterback whisperer? I mean, we throw that label around on all these other guys, but Sam Hartman, someone Wake was on very early in the process. You have John Wolford, who's the number 2 quarterback for the LA Rams, just won a Super Bowl. And then Jamie Newman, remember, he didn't pan out. He's right now in the CFL, but for a small school like Wake Forest, they're doing a really good job. And Coop, I want to circle back on the A.T. Perry thing, because he was kind of the star of the game for the Demon Deacons. He came up with some monster catches. I said it on our Twitter space Saturday morning. Hey, if you like an over when it comes to a player prop, I love A.T. Perry. That's a kid from South Florida. The big three being Miami, Florida, and Florida State. They never really gave him the time of day. And when those kids come back home and they get a chance to play one of those schools, they usually have breakout performances. And A.T. Perry, if we just want to talk scouting and how everyone missed him, I'm not really sure. I mean, he was 6'4", 170 the spring before his senior year, placed 4th at states in the long jump. He had a 37-inch vertical jump, 4.38 shuttle. I was going through some old photos, and I actually saw him at FAU's mega camp, which they ran with Michigan and a bunch of other schools a while back. So he's one that got away. And I know we're always trying to improve our process. I think if you're in a recruiting department at FSU, at Miami, at Florida, you're making sure, hey, we're not missing this guy again because we don't want him to beat us down the stretch.
Credit Dave Clawson, and Drew, you mentioned Wake Forest is a developmental program. I know we just had the graphic there of the last 5 cycles and where the Deacs have finished in the 24/7 composite team rankings. But if you look at it, last year 80th, the year before that 68th, I believe. Right now they're at number 44. So one of the best finishes in line for Dave Clawson and his Wake Forest program the last 5 years. And if you're a Wake Forest fan, you got to be pretty excited about that. But Drew, let's stick in the ACC top 10 matchup. College Game Day was there this weekend in Clemson, and this was a big game, and there was a lot of skepticism coming into the season, especially on this show, about DJ Uiagalelei and what to make of the quarterback position. A lot of turnover at Clemson, 2 new coordinators, offense and defensive side of the ball, and obviously Clemson, to me, played their most complete game of the season against North Carolina State, a team that beat them last year. They avenged that game. They win this one 30-20 and really ran away with this game in the second half. And DJ Uiagalelei, who we'll get to here in a second, I thought is playing the best ball of his career so far. But Drew, there were a lot of questions talking about which way this program was trending this offseason. And the both of us right here on this show were probably some of the strongest critics of that, questioning that. Now you look at Clemson, not only on the field, undefeated, just won their 37th straight home game. And now you look at a program ranked in the top 10 in recruiting, the number 8 recruiting class and the number 1 recruiting class in the ACC. It seems to me that everything's the same, and the ACC runs through Clemson.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I was going to say. I mean, you can't win an ACC title until you slay Dabo Swinney. And it's funny, Cooper. I mean, me and you should put our tail between our legs. We were the biggest critics of Clemson if you go back to the early signing period when they lost those 3 blue chip commits to other schools, Keon Saab, Dalen Everett, Jahad Campbell. When Dabo Swinney lost his 2 coordinators, I compared him to a battleship, just trying to get back to port and regroup and then go back out. Well, Clemson has made the repairs. And I think the biggest thing is Dabo has started to adjust, not just his on-field process, but the off-the-field process. DJU, the quarterback, to me, Clemson is putting him in position to make plays. He just ran for a career-high 73 yards in that win over NC State, scored twice with his legs. He just looks comfortable in the pocket. He looks fluid. He looks like he knows what he's doing, and I think that's what this is all about. Dabo has realized he's got to put his guys in position to win games, and we saw that with DJU. I look at this schedule for Clemson. I don't see where they trip up again. I mean, they go to Florida State. They got Syracuse at home. Syracuse undefeated, a trip to Notre Dame. But outside of that, I mean, they should theoretically run the table here. Cooper, would you not agree?
No, I think so too. I think you mentioned that Syracuse game. Syracuse is a team that's given them some trouble in the past, but I love what Clemson has done, and that really starts with DJU, but also the offensive line as well. They didn't give up a sack this week, and since 2011, Clemson is undefeated when not giving up a sack. I think a lot of the issues last year stemmed from the offensive line. There was a lot of inconsistency there. They didn't have a lot of continuity. So now, as you see this group start to gain that continuity, I think Clemson is starting to improve and play complementary football. And I think that's a really good thing if you're a Clemson fan. So the other thing about DJU right now, he's completing 65% of his passes. He was below 60% last year, 11 touchdowns, 1 INT. To me, that's a winning formula, taking care of the football. You have the talent in the backfield with a guy like Will Shipley. You proved you can run the ball. You got playmakers on the outside, and you have one of the best front sevens in football on the defensive side of the ball. I think that is the formula for Clemson. And to me, Drew, for the first time in a long time, this looked like the Clemson of old that we're used to seeing. And to me, there's not a lot of question marks around this program, and I really like them and their chances competing for a CFP.
You say Clemson of old. Well, when we looked at that recruiting section and the commit list, I would agree. I mean, they're number 8 in the country right now. It's an excellent group, a group full of star power. I know, Cooper, you love Christopher Vizina, the quarterback they got committed. And this just feels like it. And I go back to the summer months. Remember, Clemson had that huge recruiting weekend. They brought 33 official visitors in at the same time. And me and you were like, is this the right move? Have they ever thought this through? Well, most of those guys are committed. I mean, Clemson right now, they're just looking to add a final few touches, and really they've already shifted their focus to the 2024 cycle. You had Sammy Brown, the nation's number 1 ranked linebacker there over the weekend in Death Valley. You had KJ Bolden, number 1 ranked safety in the class of 2024. So Clemson, it's funny that we thought that the dynasty was taking on some water, because it looks like business as usual for Dabo Swinney there in the ACC.
So there is the wrap up on the ACC. Now let's move to a guy Dabo Swinney is pretty familiar with, and that is Brent Venables. It has been a tough couple weeks for Brent Venables and company in Norman, Oklahoma, coming off of a 55-24 loss to TCU. And Drew, this one got away early, 41-17 at halftime, as TCU piled up over 600 yards of total offense. And Brent Venables, a guy obviously part of 2 national championships at Clemson, known for his defensive prowess. This one was kind of a shocker, early 11 a.m. game. I think it left a lot of people scratching their heads. But Drew, what were your takeaways on this kind of stunning defeat for what we saw with TCU in Oklahoma?
My biggest takeaway is Oklahoma needs to do everything they can in their willpower to hang on to this number 6 ranked recruiting class, which we love because of the defenders that are committed to that group. They got to get these guys in. Let's not forget, Oklahoma is making the transition to the SEC here pretty soon. They're going to see more high-powered offenses. Heck, you're going to have to be slowing down potentially a Bryce Young-led offense at some point down the line. So they need to get these kids on campus. PJ Adewale, we think very highly of him, but 2 guys like Lewis Carter, I just watched his senior cut. I think Lewis Carter is a guy that could come in and play potentially right away. I think the same thing about Caleb Spencer, a safety they got committed out of Virginia. So Brent Venables, I mean, the narrative has quickly changed in Norman. The honeymoon, we keep saying that for these first-year head coaches, the honeymoon's over. Well, it is. Now, if I'm Brent Venables, get through this season, and more importantly, get these recruits across the finish line, because you're going to need them as early as next season once you're in that SEC.
only second time since 1999 Oklahoma has lost consecutive games. It tells you a lot about the standard of that Oklahoma football program. But Drew, you mentioned it. I love Oklahoma's recruiting class. I'm still high on Brent Venables. You said it. I think they need to get this class across the finish line the way they recruit. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but they have some difference makers, especially across the defensive line. And they missed out on a guy we're going to talk about a little bit later in the show, but Oklahoma is still flying high on the recruiting trail. But Drew, let's wrap it up with a guy that kind of stole some headlines unexpectedly, and that is Alabama's backup quarterback. That is Jalen Milroe, and a guy that was highly recruited, the number 14 ranked the number 14 ranked quarterback in the 2021 cycle. But Bryce Young goes down first half, Alabama, Arkansas. Alabama really in cruise control of that game. Jalen Milroe kind of finding his feet throughout that game, and then just an onslaught in the second half. But we saw a lot different version of an Alabama offense with Jalen Milroe at the helm with Bryce Young out. And it looks like Bryce Young is going to be day-to-day with a AC shoulder sprain, so we'll keep an eye on that. But Drew, Jalen Milroe, I mean, what were your impressions here? We knew this guy was an athlete, but he 3rd and 15, Alabama up by 5, Arkansas's got momentum, busts out a 77-yard run, and that was kind of when you knew, okay, this guy's got a little something different to him.
Yeah, well, he was a 4.6 kid on the lasers coming out of high school, 4.3 in the shuttle with a 34-inch vertical jump. I actually looked up his senior numbers. I mean, he was a kid from the Lone Star State. He only ran for like 300 yards as a senior, so he was someone that tried to throw the football, and he wasn't always a run-first guy. I think what we saw on Saturday against Arkansas, we all kind of thought, hey, this is just an athlete trying to play quarterback. To me, it's a quarterback that can also run the football. He reminds me a little bit of Jalen Hurts. And Cooper, I don't want to go too long on this, but the path from Jalen Milroe to Alabama is a bit interesting. I don't think a lot of people know this. You know, he was previously committed to Texas, and the reason why he was committed to Texas is Drake May, the current quarterback at UNC. He was committed to Alabama, right? Well, Drake May decommits after Bryce Young flips from USC to the Crimson Tide. So it's just this crazy intricate process about how he ended up there in Tuscaloosa. And I think what we're going to see from Alabama is they're going to change that offense and install some more read option looks. And I think that's what Nick Saban does best. We talked about it with Wake Forest and Clemson catering to your personnel. I think Nick Saban and Bill O'Brien, they're going to do just that if Bryce Young's not able to go.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. I think tailoring your offense to the personnel. I think Jalen Milroe, Bryce Young, two completely different styles there. Bryce Young, obviously a Heisman winner and one of the best passers in the country, if not the best passer in the country. Jalen Milroe gives you a little bit more of a dynamic on the running game. And you talk about how is that going to complement other players in the offense? Well, the receivers might have to take a step back, but Jahmyr Gibbs, a guy that we thought was going to be a complete game changer for Alabama's offense, he had his best game to date, rushing for over 200 yards. Alabama's offense as a total rushes for over 300 yards. So Alabama, I expect more ground and pound if Jalen Milroe is going to be at the helm of Alabama's offense. But it looks like Bryce Young's going to be back sooner rather than later, which is good news for everybody. But Drew, that wraps it up on the Week 5 takeaways. And before we get into Paul Chryst, Wisconsin, Karl, Dorrell, Colorado, make sure you subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Leave a like. Also, give us a comment. All of that is great. We appreciate you guys supporting the show. But Drew, let's get into it. The coaching cycle already, as you mentioned, 4 Power 5 jobs already available at Week 5 in the season. And I think this one kind of caught us by surprise a little bit. We were texting back and forth and got some information a little bit early, but nothing we felt confident enough to pop publicly. But that Paul Chryst was going to be on the way out, and this is something that we had kind of heard for the past couple of days. But Wisconsin makes it official last night. And when you think about that, what is happening here at Wisconsin, as me and you were kind of asking ourselves a question, you look at the job Paul Chryst did there, 67-26, 43-18 in the Big Ten, 3 Big Ten West titles, 2 New Year's Six Bowls victories, 2-time Big Ten Coach of the Year, 3rd most wins in program history. I mean, this is just not some impulsive move you make. Obviously something that was premeditated. Wisconsin off to a rough start this year, 2-3. They lose the home game against Washington State earlier in the year. They get boat raced by Ohio State. And then Brett Bielema coming back to Madison and having a convincing 34-10 victory. I think that obviously kind of spelled trouble there for Paul Chryst, but it looks like Jim Leonhard, defensive coordinator, a guy that played his ball at Wisconsin, former All-American there. He will be the interim head coach. And as of right now, from everything we hear, it looks like he's got a pretty good chance to win that job. We'll see how he fares over the next 7 weeks or so. But, Drew, a lot going on there, a lot to unpack. But just your initial thoughts on Wisconsin and what direction do they need to go from here?
Well, I think if you're a casual, you're kind of scratching your head. You're going, wait, what happened? Like Paul Chryst is out. But I think if you pop open the hood and start looking around at the parts, this kind of makes sense. I think the biggest concern with Wisconsin and this Paul Chryst tenure has been the recruiting. It's fallen off for the Badgers here as of late. If you go from 2019 to 2021, the Badgers' average finish when it came to the recruiting rankings was right around 24. Last year, they were in the 40s. Right now, they're in the 50s. And when I look at this group, Cooper, I mean, there's just no difference makers to steal a term that you just used. I mean, there's no top 247 kids committed, whereas there's 6 other Big Ten schools that have top 247 prospects committed. And to me, that's just surprising. I mean, Wisconsin just had 5 players drafted in the most recent NFL draft. This is a program that thrives on player development, and they've done a good job in the past of finding talent, getting it on campus, and then turning it into someone that can play on Sunday. I also think a big issue with Wisconsin is what's the plan at quarterback here? Let's say Jim does hang around. He needs to bring in someone that's going to revamp that offense, because I think that's the biggest, another big issue. I mean, the Badgers don't have a quarterback currently committed in the 23 cycle. We know Graham Mertz is there. He's in year 4, and it's really just kind of been a disappointing performance for a former All-American. I mean, he's almost thrown as many interceptions as he has touchdowns. He's got 21 interceptions to 27 touchdowns. So, what is the long-term plan at quarterback once he leaves? And to me, if you're going to promote from within with that defensive coordinator, then he's got to hire the right offensive coordinator, and that's got to be a marriage that's going to work out, because Wisconsin can find themselves in a position where they're just spinning tires if they can't get on the same page, head coach, OC, and more importantly, figure it out at quarterback.
I like Jim Leonhard. To me, I think this is a smart move by Wisconsin doing this when they did it. Paul Chryst obviously deserves all the respect in this situation. But you look at Jim Leonhard, you kind of look at his coaching history, brought to Wisconsin in 2016 by Paul Chryst. A year later, he's calling plays on the defensive side of the ball and had 4 top 10 defenses since he's been in Madison. To me, the biggest question is, Drew, what you brought up is kind of the elephant in the room. What's going to be the identity of the program from a recruiting standpoint? And can Jim Leonhard get that done? Also, if you're Wisconsin, can you see the real tangible results of that in Jim Leonhard's potential in 7 or 8 weeks as an interim head coach? To me, that's the biggest question. So I'll leave it there with Jim Leonhard. I think he's going to obviously be a guy that Wisconsin is very high on. But, Drew, let's go to our first call here in a segment that I think we have been very fond on. And I think you brought up the points. And for me, the first call is pretty simple. And I think it's a name that's been tossed around a lot with a lot of people that have been around the Wisconsin program, but that's Lance Leipold at Kansas, 5-0 right now, a guy who had a long history at Wisconsin Whitewater, 6 national championships there. Let me read the resume. Fastest coach in the NCAA to 1,000 wins, 30-17 in his last 4 seasons at Buffalo, 3 consecutive winning seasons in 20 years. So at Buffalo, excuse me. So, and then you look back at his history, he was a graduate assistant under Barry Alvarez, and we know how influential Barry Alvarez is in that program. So Lance Leipold certainly going to be the guy that I think his name is going to be highly considered, and it should. To me, it seems like a slam dunk. We're going to talk a little bit about Kansas a little bit later in the show. I would like to see Lance Leipold stay at Kansas, build that program. I think what he's done in such a short amount of time there is extremely difficult to do, and I think he is a program builder. To me, Drew, this just seems like everything about it. You got a Wisconsin native who's obviously spent a lot of time in that state with the connections that he has to the school. I don't know how Wisconsin's going to pass this guy up.
I agree with you, Cooper. If I had to make a first call, I would call him. I'd also call Brett Bielema, the guy that just came into Madison and sent Paul Chryst packing. I mean, the former head coach at Wisconsin, I would at least gauge him, have a conversation. It's probably not going to work out financially. Just kind of final thoughts on this Wisconsin job. I think you got to get someone that, can navigate that transfer portal. We've seen Wisconsin be rather selective with that, but I think you're going to need an influx of talent, more specifically so at that quarterback position, like I was hinting at. And when you look at the future schedule, Alabama comes to town in 2024, and then Wisconsin travels to Alabama in 2025. So that's two measuring sticks for a coach that'll be in year 2 or year 3. Something you also got to take into account with that Wisconsin opening.
I'm a believer in Wisconsin. I've been to Madison when we were at Michigan. That is a tough place to play. Recruits respond well to that place. I love the brand of Wisconsin. To me, Drew, the biggest question is, how do you recruit the skill positions? I think everything you're looking for and everything that we've seen from Wisconsin in terms of player development has been on either side of the line of scrimmage, whether that's offense, defensive line, or front 7 players. To me, the biggest question is, where do you go to get your skill position talent? I think that's the question that Jim Leonhard has to answer, and that's going to be something we're going to be keeping an eye on. But a couple other names for Wisconsin that I have my eye on: Dave Aranda from Baylor, obviously a lot of connections to the Wisconsin program. Matt Campbell at Iowa State, he seems to be a name that has been considered for just about every job opening so far. Luke Fickell, I'm going to keep bringing him up until somebody hires him. I think he's going to stay at Cincinnati. He's going to be hard to pluck, but this is another Big Ten job that kind of fits the parameters of what he's looking for. And then you have Matt Rule there as well with the Carolina Panthers. I don't expect him to make it out of this season with Carolina, so I think he's going to be another hot name. And then Dave Doran there in NC State, originally from the Midwest, doing a great job there with the Wolfpack. So a lot of names. I think Wisconsin is going to be in a buyer's market, and I think they're going to be in a good position. So Wisconsin, Madison, we will keep our eyes on that one. But Drew, Colorado, like who would have guessed? Karl Dorrell out after 23 games in Colorado. Mike Sanford, the former Western Kentucky head coach and now the offensive coordinator at Colorado, now been promoted to the interim head coach. And Colorado, Drew, this was kind of a hard one for us to wrap our heads around, even before when they hired Karl Dorrell. But they lose on Saturday to Arizona 43-20, and that was their closest point differential of the season. Goes to show the state of that program. They haven't had back-to-back winning seasons since 04-05. Drew, I know you kind of brought it up pre-production, but how attractive is this job, especially with USC, UCLA, the two biggest names in the conference, leaving for the Big Ten here pretty soon?
Well, I've gone back and forth. Is this an attractive job? Is it not an attractive job? I mean, you took it right out of my mouth. Those two schools leaving for the Pac-12, I think it kind of knocks it down a little bit of a tier because you don't know what the future of the Pac-12 is. I've seen different takes, different theories out there. I think Colorado is attractive. I mean, I see them all the time when they're humming. That they go into Texas and recruit well, and they come down here to South Florida and they recruit well. They got a few kids committed out of St. Thomas Aquinas High School. And I also think what people are overlooking is the state of Colorado actually has some good high school football. The issue is the Buffs can't keep any of those kids home. Right now, out of the top 10 ranked kids in that state, Colorado holds a commitment just from one of them. 8 others are committed to other schools, some of them in the Pac-12, and then one's undecided. So I think you're going to need some time here. It seems like it's going to be a bit of a full rebuild. I mean, they're not a program that has been attracting top 247 talent or guys we would peg as future NFLers. So someone's got to come in with a good recruiting base, I think, nationally. And one name that stands out to me is a guy right in their backyard, Troy Calhoun over there at Air Force. But no, this is an interesting one. I just don't know how attractive it is to some of these candidates out there. I think if we're talking on the totem pole, they're at the tail end of it.
Boulder's an attractive spot. You can have a lot of fun in Boulder if you're not careful. Listen, they also have really good resources in terms of the program itself and the facilities. I think you can build a winner at Colorado. And my first call here would be a guy that we talked about earlier in the show. That's Dave Clawson. I mean, he's been a proven winner just about everywhere he's been. Bowling Green before Wake Forest. Before that, it was Richmond. And then it was Fordham before that. So you look at what he's done at Wake Forest, it's pretty impressive. I want to say 5 straight bowl appearances at Wake Forest. Now a team that won 11 games last year. You have them in position right now at 4-1. They're going toe-to-toe with Clemson and then going into Tallahassee beating an undefeated Florida State team. So if you're looking for continuity, if you're looking from a macro level roster building standpoint, a guy that's had a lot of success, I don't know if they can lure a guy like Dave Clawson, but to me that makes a lot of sense. Some other names there, I think Justin Wilcox at Cal, it kind of seems like a move for him. That why would you make that move? I think the resources at Colorado compared to California make a lot of sense for him to make a move like that. But also some other guys on the West Coast, Troy Taylor at Sacramento State, FCS, Sac State, doing a great job. They beat Colorado State, beat the brakes off of Colorado State earlier this year. Jake Dickert at Washington State, Mike Elko at Duke, and Kane Womack at Southern Alabama. I think all those guys, we don't talk enough about Mike Elko and the job that he's done at Duke. 4-1 right now, just beat Virginia last week. So Blue Devils feeling pretty good, but that's neither here nor there. Colorado, that job, we'll see what happens there. I think they'll be deliberate in that process. But to me, if I'm a Colorado fan, my last thought on this, if I still have the AD and Rick George that hired Karl Dorrell, why would I have any confidence in him hiring the next guy? That makes zero sense to me. That felt like a completely complacent hire where they did not do their due diligence. I would be scratching my head and I'd be a little concerned if I was a Colorado fan. But Drew, let's wrap this show up. 2-minute drill. And this is something that kind of stunned us last week on Wednesday. I think when we got off this show, it was only an hour and a half later where the top defensive lineman in the country in the 2023 cycle was going to make his commitment. And from everything we heard, he was going to end up a Boomer Sooner with Oklahoma and Brent Venables. But David Hicks kind of stuns everybody and ends up committing to Texas A&M and Jimbo Fisher, joining a very loaded and talented defensive line room. Drew, your thoughts on David Hicks's commitment to the Aggies?
It's crazy what Texas A&M is doing in that defensive line room. Hicks, the number 1 ranked defensive lineman for us in the class of 2023. He joins, or he could potentially join, a Texas A&M group that includes the number 1 ranked defensive lineman in the class of 2022, the number 3, the number 4, the number 6, the number 8. I mean, this is like an NFL front. And I know everyone's going to say, well, hey, Texas A&M struggling on the field, they can't get it done. Sure, yes, absolutely. But man, in 2-3 years, this unit is going to be lethal, assuming they keep progressing. We've seen Shamar Stewart out there a little bit. I just think it's wild that David Hicks, knowing what's ahead of him on that depth chart, deciding to go play at Texas A&M, it says a lot about the recruiting efforts for Jimbo Fisher's staff and what they are doing. Because some guys would be scared of those names that are ahead of them. David Hicks obviously isn't one of them. And I think what Jimbo Fisher is doing and creating on that defensive side of the ball is a situation kind of just like at Georgia, where the best players play. The cream rises to the crop. You're either in or you're out. And if you're out, you're probably in the transfer portal. So impressive news. We'll see if anything happens on that front. But man, if anyone on Texas A&M's schedule in the next few years, if you're an offensive lineman, you got to be like, oh my gosh, this is not going to be fun.
A&M's got a lot of problems right now. That's a good problem to have, that defensive line room, as they figure that out. Drew, my 2-minute drill, I'm going to hit on Curt Cignetti. And you might say, who is that? That is the head coach of James Madison, the Dukes, James Madison University, their first year in the FBS. They are 4-0 right now, 2-0 in the Fun Belt Conference, beating Middle Tennessee State. They also beat App State on the road. They were down 28-3 in that game in the second quarter. They come back, they win that game 32-28. But how about the Dukes, man? I had so much success at the FCS level, their first year in the FBS right now. They are 4-0, and they are cooking. And if you look at those games, I mentioned Middle Tennessee State. You see Norfolk State right there. But their margin of victory right now is extremely impressive for a program that is spending their first year at the FBS ranks. And you listen to James Madison head coach Curt Cignetti talk. He's talking about he's got his eyes on the prize. He's got his team focused on a college football playoff appearance. Once that college football playoff format expands from 4 to 12, obviously there's going to be an auto bid for the highest ranked team in the group of 5. I love James Madison. I love where they're at right now. It's a success story. I kind of looked down. I was kind of doing some research, and I was like, where did these guys come from? So James Madison, Curt Cignetti, hats off to those guys and the job that they're doing. But, Drew, I think that's all for today. Final thoughts as we close this show out.
Toddy Centillo, James Madison's quarterback. He's a kid from South Florida, 5'6", former Florida Fire, former Miami commit. No, I love it. That is a cool story. Man, the Sun Belt, dude, that's like an awesome conference. Whoever gets that TV contract moving forward is going to be set up very well. I mean, Georgia Southern looks like on the rise. We'll see what happens with Charles Huff there at Marshall, but Ricky Riney at Old Dominion. I mean, that is the conference of upsets right now, and it'll be exciting to watch and see how that develops in a few years.
Fun Belt is fun. It might be ESPN 8 The Ocho that gets the TV rights there. We'll have to keep an eye on that. But hey, before we go, our team of the week on Wednesday. Our first time ever, we got co-team of the week, and that is going to be the state of Kansas itself. 5-0 Kansas, 4-1 Kansas State. We will talk about each of these recruiting classes. We're pretty excited about this because we don't really get an opportunity to do this much. Kansas right now, number 74 ranked recruiting class. We'll dive into that. 9 commitments. Kansas State, number 39 ranked recruiting class. They got a guy in the top 247. His name is Avery Johnson. He has been balling out this year. So Andrew and I will talk about that. We're super excited. And before we go, make sure to subscribe to the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. Smash the subscribe button, smash the like button, guys. Leave a comment for us. But for Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. We'll see you on Wednesday, 3 o'clock Eastern time. Thanks for joining us.